"You're not welcome here," my dad said, stepping in front of me before I could even reach my grandmother's casket. His voice was loud enough for every person in the funeral home to hear. "She wouldn't have wanted you here." My uncle looked down at the floor. My cousins pretended not to notice. Someone whispered, "She should just leave." I swallowed the lump in my throat and asked, "Are you sure that's what Grandma wanted?" Before my father could answer, a calm voice came from the back of the room. "Nobody leaves until the reading of the will." My father's confident smile disappeared so quickly that I knew something had just changed. "My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 35 years old and I work as a public school librarian. My job isn't exciting to most people, but I love it. Every day I help children discover stories that teach courage, kindness, and hope. Books have always been my safe place because real life often felt much harder than any novel sitting on my library shelves. Growing up, I was never the child my father proudly talked about. That place belonged to my older brother, Daniel. If Daniel fixed a broken chair, Dad called him talented. If I earned perfect grades, Dad said I was just lucky. If Daniel forgot Grandma's birthday, everyone laughed it off. If I made one small mistake, I heard about it for weeks. I spent years wondering what was wrong with me. I wasn't loud. I wasn't competitive. I didn't chase attention. I simply believed that treating people with respect mattered more than proving I was better than anyone else. Grandma Evelyn saw something different. Whenever I doubted myself, she'd smile, squeeze my hand, and say, "Natalie, quiet people hear things loud people never will." She encouraged me to finish college when money was tight. She celebrated when I became a librarian. She even helped me buy my first used car after graduation because she believed independence mattered more than appearances. I wasn't rich or glamorous. I didn't own a fancy house or expensive jewelry. I lived in a small apartment filled with books, plants, and memories. But I had something my family never expected me to have. Grandma trusted me. Not because I asked for anything. Because I never did. As the years passed, family dinners became uncomfortable. My father always found a way to criticize me. Daniel always joined in. Eventually I stopped attending most gatherings. They told everyone I had abandoned the family, but the truth was much simpler. I was tired of begging people to treat me with basic kindness. The only person I never stopped visiting was Grandma. Even after her health began failing, I visited every Saturday morning. We'd drink tea together while the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls filled her tiny kitchen. We'd laugh about old neighborhood stories or read newspaper puzzles together. Those mornings reminded me that love didn't have to be loud to be real. So when she passed away, there was never any question. I was going to be there. Not for money. Not for attention. Only to say goodbye to the woman who never made me feel unwanted. If you've ever felt invisible inside your own family, I hope you'll stay with me until the end of this story. Sometimes the people who doubt you the most end up revealing far more about themselves than about you. If you've ever been underestimated even when you kept doing the right thing, please subscribe. I'd also love to know if you've ever had one person who believed in you when almost nobody else did. Share your story in the comments, and if you'd like to support stories like this, click hype, or leave a like before we continue. The funeral home was quiet except for the soft sound of people speaking in low voices. White flowers surrounded Grandma's casket, and the scent of lilies filled the room. I took one slow step forward, hoping to place my hand on the polished wood before the service began. Instead, my father blocked my path. "I told you not to come," he said sharply. "I came to honor Grandma," I answered. "No," he replied. "You came because you think there's something here for you." Before I could respond, Daniel walked over with a smug smile. "Let's be honest," he said. "You disappeared for years and now you suddenly show up. Everyone knows why." Several relatives nodded. One aunt folded her arms. "I always knew she'd come looking for inheritance," she muttered loudly enough for others to hear. The words hit harder than I expected. None of them knew how many weekends I'd spent caring for Grandma when nobody else visited. None of them cared to ask. I looked toward Grandma's casket one last time and whispered, "I'm sorry." I decided leaving would be better than turning her funeral into another family argument. I had barely reached the hallway when the family lawyer stood up. "Excuse me," he called firmly. "Mrs. Evelyn Brooks left very specific written instructions." The room became completely silent. She requested that every member of her immediate family remain present until her will has been read. I stopped walking. Slowly I turned around. Across the room, my father's expression changed from confidence to quiet concern, and for the first time that day he looked like a man who wasn't completely sure what would happen next. I turned around and walked back into the room without saying a word. Every pair of eyes followed me. A few relatives exchanged uneasy glances, but nobody spoke. My father stepped aside this time. He didn't apologize. He didn't have to. The silence between us said enough. The funeral service continued, but I barely heard the minister's words. My attention drifted to the old wooden cross at the front of the room and then back to Grandma's picture. She was smiling in the photograph, the same warm smile she always gave me whenever life became difficult. I held on to that image because it was stronger than the whispers floating around the room. When the service ended, people gathered in small groups. Instead of comforting one another, many of my relatives seemed more interested in talking about the estate. I wonder who gets the house. The savings account must be worth something. I heard she changed the will. They weren't even trying to hide it. I walked toward a quiet corner, hoping to stay out of everyone's way. Before I reached it, I heard my father speaking loudly to my uncle. "Natalie walked away from this family years ago," he said. "She only visited Mom when she wanted something." My feet stopped. That wasn't just unfair. It was a lie. I remembered every Saturday morning, every grocery trip, every doctor's appointment, every evening spent helping Grandma organize her medications. My father had been absent for most of those moments, yet now he spoke as if he had been there all along. My uncle frowned. "I didn't know that." Dad sighed dramatically. "She always liked playing the victim." Several relatives nodded as though they had just learned some hidden truth. I wanted to interrupt. I wanted to shout. Instead, I remembered Grandma's voice. "Truth doesn't need to shout, Natalie. It only needs time." I took a slow breath and stayed silent. A few minutes later, I walked toward the refreshment table. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the sweet scent of baked pastries. I hadn't eaten all morning, but my stomach was too tight for food. As I poured a small cup of coffee, Daniel appeared beside me. "You should have saved yourself the trip," he said quietly. "I came for Grandma." He laughed. "No. You came because you thought she left you something." I looked him straight in the eyes. "You really believe that?" "I know you," he replied. "No," I answered calmly. "You only think you do." His smile disappeared for a second before returning. "You've always been jealous." I shook my head. "I never wanted what was yours." He leaned closer. "That's good. Because you're leaving with nothing." He walked away before I could answer. Across the room, I noticed him talking with several cousins. Their conversation stopped every time they glanced in my direction. A few moments later, one of my younger cousins approached me. "Natalie," she said softly, "Daniel told everyone you convinced Grandma to stop trusting the family." I stared at her. "What?" "He said you manipulated her during the last couple of years." The words felt like another punch. "I never manipulated Grandma." "I didn't think so," my cousin whispered. "But he's telling everyone that's why she changed." I thanked her for being honest. Watching Daniel spread those lies hurt more than I expected. He wasn't defending himself against anything. He was creating a story before the truth had a chance to appear. Suddenly made sense. If enough people believed I had influenced Grandma, then anything surprising in the will could be blamed on me instead of questioned. The plan was clever. But clever. I walked into the hallway to collect myself. The sound of quiet conversations echoed through the building while rain tapped gently against the windows. I closed my eyes. Not because I was giving up, because I refused to cry in front of them. When I returned, I accidentally overheard another conversation outside the meeting room. "We'll split Grandma's jewelry between us," one aunt said. "The furniture can go to Daniel," another replied. "What about Natalie?" someone asked. A short laugh followed. "She doesn't deserve anything." Nobody argued. Nobody reminded them I was still family. They spoke as though I had already disappeared. For just a moment, I felt like that little girl again. The one standing at the edge of family photographs while everyone else smiled together. Then another memory came back. Grandma placing her hands around mine. Never measure your worth by people who benefit from making you feel small. The pain didn't disappear, but it became easier to carry. I lifted my head and walked back inside. Across the room, I noticed the family lawyer watching everything. He wasn't speaking to anyone. He simply observed each conversation with calm, careful eyes. Once our eyes met, he gave me a small nod. It lasted only a second. Still, something about it settled my nerves. He had seen everything. Every insult. Every accusation. Every lie. What nobody in that room knew was that Grandma had prepared me long before this day ever arrived. Years earlier, after one difficult family dinner, she handed me a small wooden box. "Keep every letter," she told me. "Someday they'll matter." At the time I thought she was being sentimental. She wasn't. Inside that box were handwritten notes, birthday cards, copies of emails she printed herself, financial records, and detailed journals about conversations she'd had with family members. As the years passed, she quietly added more documents. Whenever someone pressured her for money or tried convincing her to change her estate plans, she wrote it down. Whenever my father demanded another loan. Whenever Daniel suggested she should simplify her will. Whenever they visited only to discuss property instead of her health. She recorded it all. She even saved emails asking her to remove my name from important documents. She never showed those papers to anyone except me. "I don't want revenge," she once said while placing another envelope into the box. "I only want the truth protected." I promised her I would. After she passed away, I read every page again. Each sentence revealed the same heartbreaking pattern. She had loved her family. But she had also seen exactly who they became whenever money entered the conversation. I never planned to expose anyone. I prayed those papers would never be needed. But standing inside that funeral home, surrounded by fresh lies and old betrayals, I finally understood why Grandma had trusted me with them. The moment she had quietly prepared me for was no longer somewhere in the future. It had arrived. I was carefully placing the wooden box back into my bag when I heard someone say my name. "Natalie." I looked up and saw Mr. Harold Bennett, Grandma's attorney. He had known our family for more than 30 years. His gray suit was perfectly pressed, and his calm expression hadn't changed all day. "Would you come with me for a moment?" he asked. I followed him into a small office beside the chapel. The room smelled of old books, paper, and polished wood. He closed the door behind us and waited until we were alone. "You've handled today with more grace than most people could," he said. I almost walked away. "I know. They made it clear they don't want me here." He gave me a gentle smile. "Your grandmother expected this." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" He opened a folder and slid a single page across the desk. It contains instructions she wrote almost 4 years ago. I read the first few lines. "If Natalie is ever treated unfairly at my funeral or during the reading of my will, I want her to stay. She deserves to hear my own words." My eyes filled with tears. "She knew this would happen?" Mr. Bennett nodded. "She hoped she was wrong. But she prepared for the possibility." I slowly folded the paper. "I don't want revenge." "Neither did she," he replied. "She wanted honesty." He looked directly at me. "The truth has a way of arriving at exactly the right moment." I took a deep breath. "I'll stay. I'm glad." As we returned to the main room, I heard my father's loud voice before I even saw him. "The house will stay in the family," he told several relatives. "Mom would have wanted that." Daniel laughed. "There's nothing to worry about. Everything will be exactly as we expected." My father noticed me walking in. He smirked. "You still here?" "Yes." "I hope you aren't getting your hopes up." "I came to honor Grandma." He folded his arms. "That's not what anyone here believes." Several relatives chuckled. I didn't answer. For the first time all day, I didn't feel hurt by their words. I simply watched them. They were so certain they had already won. They spoke about Grandma's belongings as if every decision had already been made. One aunt pointed toward an old painting hanging in the hallway. "I've always wanted that." Another cousin replied, "Daniel should get Grandpa's watch." Someone else added, "We'll figure it out after the reading." Nobody mentioned Grandma's wishes. Only their own. Daniel walked past me one more time. "You've had your little moment," he whispered. "When this is over, don't expect anyone to call." I wasn't expecting anyone to. He laughed. "Good." He honestly believed I was standing there alone. He had no idea that the one person who understood everything was quietly arranging papers inside a leather briefcase. Mr. Bennett checked his watch. Then he addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Evelyn Brooks requested that the reading begin immediately. Conversations stopped. Chairs scraped across the floor as everyone took their seats around the large conference table. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows. Nobody smiled now. The room felt heavy. Mr. Bennet placed several sealed envelopes beside him. He adjusted his glasses and looked around carefully. I ask that nobody interrupt until I have finished reading each section. My father leaned back confidently. Daniel crossed his arms with a satisfied grin. I quietly sat near the end of the table. My heart was steady. Whatever happened next, I knew Grandma's voice would finally be heard. Mr. Bennet broke the first seal. This document represents the final will and personal statement of Evelyn Brooks. Every person in the room became silent. He began reading. To my family, if you are hearing these words, then I hope you remember me for the love I tried to give each of you. Several relatives smiled politely. Then his voice continued. I also hope you remember that kindness matters more than possessions. The smiles faded. Mr. Bennet turned another page. My granddaughter Natalie visited me faithfully when my health declined. She asked for nothing. She expected nothing. She simply gave her time. The room became perfectly still. My father shifted in his chair. Daniel looked down at the table. Mr. Bennet continued reading. I watched others visit only when financial matters needed discussing. Those conversations brought me great sadness. My father immediately interrupted. That's not true. Mr. Bennet calmly raised one hand. I asked everyone not to interrupt. Dad sat back, clearly frustrated. The lawyer reached into another folder. In addition to her written statement, Mrs. Brooks instructed me to present supporting documents if anyone questioned her intentions. He carefully removed several copies. I have printed emails, financial requests, signed notes, and dated records kept by Mrs. Brooks herself. He handed copies around the table. My father grabbed his first. Daniel leaned over to read another. Neither of them spoke. One email requested another large loan. Another asked Grandma to rewrite sections of her estate. Another discussed selling her home before she had even suggested moving. Every page carried dates. Every page matched Grandma's handwriting or verified correspondence. An aunt quietly whispered, I never knew about these. A cousin slowly shook his head. My father finally spoke. Those papers don't prove anything. Mr. Bennet calmly answered. Then perhaps these recordings summarized by Mrs. Brooks, together with witness statements and financial records, will provide additional context. More documents were passed around. The confidence my father carried all morning began disappearing. Daniel's face had turned pale. Mr. Bennet looked directly at everyone. Mrs. Brooks anticipated that some people might challenge her decisions. That is why she carefully documented every important conversation during her final years. Silence settled across the room. I finally spoke. I never came here for money. Everyone looked at me. I came because I loved Grandma. Nobody answered. Not because they hadn't heard me. Because for the first time they understood it was true. Mr. Bennet opened the final envelope. There is one last instruction. He smiled gently in my direction before continuing. Mrs. Brooks appoints Natalie Brooks as the sole executor of her estate and the person responsible for fulfilling every charitable commitment listed in these documents because, in her own words, she has always chosen honesty over convenience. My father's mouth opened but no words came out. Daniel looked around the room, searching for someone to defend him. Nobody did. Every lie they had repeated throughout the day had collapsed beneath the weight of Grandma's own words. The room that had rejected me only hours earlier now sat in complete, undeniable silence. No one spoke for several long seconds. The only sound in the room was the steady rain outside the windows. I looked around the table and saw expressions I never thought I'd witness. Embarrassment. Regret. The same relatives who had avoided my eyes earlier were now looking anywhere except at my father and brother. Dad finally cleared his throat. Natalie, he began, maybe we've all misunderstood a few things. I looked at him calmly. No, I said. Nothing was misunderstood. Daniel leaned forward. We don't have to make this worse. I met his eyes. I didn't. Neither of them had an answer. Mr. Bennet carefully gathered the remaining papers. As executor, Natalie will carry out Mrs. Brooks' wishes exactly as written. I nodded. I will. Grandma had left instructions to fund the local library's reading program, donate money to the animal shelter where she had volunteered for years, and provide scholarships for students who wanted to become teachers or librarians. She believed that helping strangers build better lives was more valuable than leaving people another reason to fight. Those were the wishes I intended to honor. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile at anyone's humiliation. That wasn't what Grandma had taught me. As people slowly stood to leave, a few relatives quietly approached me. One aunt lowered her head. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I believed what I was told." "I know," I replied. My younger cousin hugged me tightly. "I should have spoken up sooner." "You spoke when it mattered." Even that small act of honesty meant more to me than she realized. Dad walked toward the door without another word. His shoulders looked heavier than they had that morning. Daniel followed him, but not before glancing back one last time. For the first time in our lives, he couldn't hide behind Dad's approval. The truth had taken that away. I stayed behind after everyone left. The funeral home felt peaceful again. I walked over to Grandma's photograph and gently touched the edge of its frame. "Thank you," I whispered. "Not for the responsibility. Not for trusting me with her estate. For believing in me when I was just a quiet little girl trying to understand why love inside a family sometimes came with conditions." She had given me something no amount of money could ever replace. He gave me back my dignity. As I stepped outside, the rain had stopped. Soft sunlight was breaking through the clouds, warming the wet sidewalk beneath my feet. It felt like the end of a very long season. That day taught me something I will never forget. People can repeat lies for years, but the truth only needs one honest moment to change everything. I no longer needed my father's approval. I no longer needed my brother's acceptance. I already had something stronger. I knew who I was. And because of Grandma, everyone else finally did too. If you've ever been pushed aside or told you didn't belong in your own family, then you already know how deeply those wounds can stay with you. If you've had to stand alone while others believed a story that wasn't true, I hope this reminds you to keep holding on to the truth. Subscribe if stories like this speak to your heart. Share your own experience in the comments because your voice might help someone who's silently living through the same pain. Click hype to help this story reach others who need it. Standing up for yourself is never easy, especially when the people hurting you share your last name. If you've lived through something similar, I'd love for you to become part of this community by subscribing. Let me know this story meant something to you by clicking hype. And tell me where you're watching from because I truly enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next story.